Welcome to another episode of the Spinoza Triad, where Dr. Richard Miller, Dan Rowland and myself, John Gibbs, explore ideas which interest us. This week, we are looking at free speech and its limits. What can be said and can't be said. What might cause offence. What should be banned, limited, or controlled? Or should anything be open to discussion? We start with Socrates, the first of the great disruptors, someone condemned to death for the things he said. Then hopefully we attempt a more contemporary discussion. Would Socratic reasoning, dialogue and inquiry be welcome today? Or would he also suffer a similar fate? Well, hopefully not drinking hemlock. I hope you enjoy our discussion. We start with a review of the trial and death of Socrates.
Our topic this week on the Spinoza Triad is Socrates. So we're going back to the beginnings of philosophy. Yeah, it is the beginnings of philosophy in a way, because everything before Socrates is pre-Socratic. And then you get Socrates, and it's sort of like this dominating figure. But of course, Socrates is a figure who we only see him because he writes nothing down. We only see him through the eyes of Plato primarily. Remember, when we talk about Socrates, we're talking about the representation of Socrates by Plato.
And John, there is a kind of around these texts the argument that the earlier Plato will be a more direct representation of Socrates, and the later one, people claim that it's Plato speaking, using Socrates.
Well, as far as I understand it, the dialogues which concern the prosecution and the trial and the death Socrates, some of the earliest that Plato wrote. So he wrote them as quite a young man, probably within a decade or so.
And he was a student of Socrates, wasn't he?
Yeah, so even though Plato's going to feed in his own ideas and build upon Socrates and create, and he's going to use Socrates in all his other dialogues, but not all, nearly all of them, as the central mouthpiece of his own ideas. I think the Socrates you get in the dialogues of the trial and the trial and the death of Socrates is a probably fair representation of
what was the problem? What was he accused of?
Yeah, it's interesting that really, because it's oddly modern, because the thing that surprises people, I think, is that he is prosecuted, tried and put to death by a democracy, and the democracy is just back in power in Athens after a period of dictatorship. The 30 tyrants, brutal period of dictatorship. And prior to that, the loss of a war, the Peloponnesian War, the long war against Sparta, which in the end, Athens lost badly. Suffered the plague, lots and lots of Athenians, including Pericles, died. They suffered monstrous defeat in their expedition into Syracuse and betrayal by people like Alcibiades. And Alcibiades is going to appear in a number of dialogues as a friend of Plato, and that's the problem for Socrates. When democracy returns after the dictatorship, there's a period of blame and fear, and Socrates is not a popular figure. He's been lampooned a bit already in the clouds, as a comic figure. He's seen as someone who's always a bit troubling, but his circle included Alcibiades, who betrayed Athens. And his circle included young aristocratic men who aren't particularly favoured, like Plato isn't particularly happy with democracy. So even though Socrates has not done anything personally to aid the Spartans or anything like that kind, and he's not accused of that, he's an unpopular figure by enough of a faction within democratic Athens for him to be accused of the charges of corrupting youth, not believing in the gods, and introducing alternative gods into Athens. So effectively, he's corrupted youth and he's blasphemous.
But it's a weird one. The blasphemy. It's he doesn't deny the gods as such, does he? I mean, he just introduces, from what I can understand from it, he's got his own personal kind of spirit, hasn't he, which he consults all the time.
His belief in, which is commonplace belief among the pantheistic Greeks, in the thing called the daimon, which is a kind of personal spirit guide, I suppose, is the way to think of this. And that's what he's accused of introducing into these daimonic beliefs. It's a belief in a kind of spiritual guide. But at the same time, he's encouraged people to be skeptical about the very existence of God. So he's accused contradictorily. He points this out at the trial. One part of his own defense at the trial in the Apology, as reported by Plato, is that he says, how can I be an atheist and yet believe in a spiritual, personal spirit guide? I can't be both. And of course, the way he defends himself is not by what he should have done, as it were, is he should have humbly apologized for the appalling acts and said he won't do it again. But he doesn't do any of that stuff. He basically accuses the people of not understanding what he's doing. So he gets right under their skin again. And only loses by a small majority.
30 votes, isn't it?
30 votes out of several hundred.
And doesn't he also say that the voice is only?
So those are the three.
Does he not also say the voice is only a negative voice? It tells him not to do something. And so he wasn't being told not to defend himself in the way he is during the trial. So therefore, he was using a religious argument to confirm his theism, because the voice was telling him wasn't telling him not to go ahead with what he was saying.
Yeah, completely. I mean, he gets right under it. I mean, this is the funny bit of the whole trial is after he puts forward a series of arguments against the accusations. He at the end they say, well, when he's found guilty, he says that he's able to propose what he thinks should be the punishment. And he says, well, I have since what I've been doing is not corrupting the youth, but in fact expanding their understanding, then I need to be given free food for life. Pension, in effect, he says. Oh, thank you very much. I'm a public servant. I've done good things, as I've demonstrated, so my punishment should be a pension, in effect. That goes down very badly. And then he says, oh, well, I'll have a tiny fine, like nothing. A little token fine. That goes down bad. Then rich friends say, no, we'll pay a big fine for him. Don't worry, we'll pay a big fine. But it's too late by then. He's upset everybody.
Well, he kind of embarrasses people, doesn't he? That's his
Socratic irony. Yeah. I was going to say, in terms of that, the punishment as well, even when he's given death, normally the death sentence should have been carried out straight away. And I think because it was during a holiday season, it was postponed. And some people said the postponement was to give him enough time to...
It's a month later, isn't it?
To free himself. Yeah. And obviously then that shows he's such a principled person that the law has spoken and he must take his punishment.
Yes, and later on in history, Aristotle is going to fall out with the authorities in Athens and just gets out, goes up to Macedonia. And so that was an option, as his friends are urging him to do. Just go, just leave. You know, you're a famous person, go somewhere else. And the reason he doesn't do that is because he says, look, I've obeyed the laws all my life, and I've urged people to obey those laws. I'm a citizen of this state and have observed the laws and expected other people to observe the laws. So I can't now live by the laws. I've expected other people to live by the laws, so I have to die by the laws.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's quite an interesting point when we get on to the next part. We talk about his relevance now, because quite easy to read him in some respects as you could read him as a maverick until he comes out with that.
It is. You're right. I've never thought of that. He is actually. That's a very, very sort of almost conservative observation.
Yeah, and I mean, his other defences, doesn't he? He argues, why would he pursue the bad? He hasn't irrational even to do that, to pursue the bad. So, and then if he's corrupted the youth, he asks, well, where are they all? If he's corrupted all of these people, well, it's quite. That's in.
Well, yeah, he deals with the corruption business by trying to point out what he's done, and what he's done to the youth is make them think. And if they've been corrupted, well, where are all these people that he is supposedly corrupted? So we're just observing that Socrates curiously asserts the necessity for a good citizen to obey the law, and that's why he doesn't flee.
The appeal here of Socrates, I mean, he was the cornerstone of...
he asked questions And he says it's the answers that don't make any sense. The answers go round in circles. So it's not, and that's part of his Socratic irony, that there is no fundamental answers to the things that people purport to hold. He gets in trouble with the authorities because he's bringing in all the contradictions of all the universal truths that they hold on to.
How can I corrupt the youth when all I claim to know is nothing? And he says, and he recounts the story in the Apology. He says, or Plato recounts him recounting the story, how the Delphic oracle had said he's the wisest man. And he said, well, I can't be the wisest man because I find that I don't know anything. All I do is try to find out what justice is, what truth is, what virtue is, what piety is. But the people, they seem to know. What I find is that lots of people seem to know things.
And he exposes folly in others, doesn't he? I mean, the whole point of his sort of Socratic dialogue is that he makes it's the sophists that he has it in for, doesn't he? People who are they the ones that are paid to teach, aren't they? That like wisdom, consider themselves wise. Yeah. So he kind of makes them look bad, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That's where we get the phrase sophistry from, where you're using kind of clever thinking to pull the veil of confusion over people's eyes. I think he basically said that human wisdom is worthless. Is that kind of what he's saying?
Well, he's saying he's not wise, isn't he? He's saying that he's
saying all of it. He's saying nobody can really know anything.
Yeah, that is one of the ways you can take Socrates. Kind of say that in the end that you get a tremendous Socratic relativism and skepticism, that you can't know anything. The skeptics are gonna take that in the future. But as we also say, the Socrates of Plato is going to say, well, no, there are virtues and real truths existing external to this world, in the world of forms. Whether Socrates actually says any of that is hard to say. He does, yeah. He introduces the idea of there being how do we know what's good? We know what's good because we've lived before and we've been reincarnated millions of times. So that what you're doing when you say this is good, this is just, and this is religious, you're remembering some sense of the truth that you knew in your soul knew. And what we human beings have done is forgotten this stuff. So into the mouth of Socrates, whether Plato's put it there or not, comes this idea of there existing the external world to the cave, somewhere truth exists, and we are sort of fumbling around trying to remember it. Looking at the world through a glass darkly. We're trying to find the world of forms in our fumbling, bumbling kind of way.
I think also there's the big theme, obviously, about death. I think he kind of sees death as a gateway to those true forms. So you'll be seeing it's either nothing, and then it will be a relief, he says, or it will be a gateway to something which would give people access to the forms. So you'd actually see truth as it truly is.
He talks about Hades, doesn't he? I mean, I thought this was something later taken on board by religion, wasn't it? A lot of the religions, Christianity, I know.
Well, yeah, at the very end of the Apology, at the very end of his trial, he says, well, you've condemned me to death. So I go to death, and you go to life. But who's to say which has got the better deal here? And Neoplatonism is going to dovetail nicely into Christianity and Islam through people like Thomas Aquinas and so on. They're going to take this, because the idea of the world of forms is not that distant to the idea of heaven and an eternal God or whatever.
And could you also say there's a link with Buddhism as well? This kind of eternal soul endlessly improving. I don't know if he talks about. He does kind of talk about different incarnations at some point, where you your soul is eternal and you keep being put back into new forms.
Yes. Yeah, your soul is eternal, and is and this world is not well, again, whether Socrates says any of this or whether that's Plato's idea, but there's a bit of a paradox there, because if you know nothing, Socrates, how do you know that? And if you know nothing, how do you know nothing? I mean, all these things, there's a sort of circularity about these things. That he says, I do know at least that I know nothing. That's not a bad starting point. But if later on you're going to say soul goes through transformations and the world forms, and there is a truth we're searching for. So what he proposes, in a sense, is it's like a paradoxical thing. You think you know what justice is. I'll show that you don't really know what it is. As soon as you try and define what justice is, you're going to get into problems. I'll show you don't really know what justice is, but there is such a thing as justice. There is such a thing as pure, understood justice, if we could get there. I've just shown that you don't know that yet.
It was that quote that he has: the unexamined life is not worth living. So it's really the pursuit of finding out, isn't it? That's why he was disturbing young minds, wasn't it? He was encouraging people to inquire. Bring him now forward. What's his relevance today, or where can we situate him today, or is there any kind of like? Because I saw quite a few parallels. I thought it was quite interesting. His trial and what he's ultimately put to death for was really a kind of issue of, well, I thought freedom of speech and the idea of an authentic life, which are quite dominant themes at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think the cancelling of Socrates in a very straightforward kind of way, in that he has to drink the hemlock, and that'll cancel someone. The cancelling of Socrates, in a sense, is relevant to us today, because we are. But then again, so much is, as soon as you enter the world of Plato, and the reason that Socrates is Socrates and the before Socrates are the pre-Socratics, is he's not concerned with the nature of the universe and whether things are real or are we made of water or air. He's talking about justice and freedom and piety and ness and virtue. Well, that's what we all do. That's what we're doing today. This is ethical philosophy. So the area of which says, are things good innately, naturally, or are things simply social constructions? So that's why, in a sense, what we're looking at here is intensely modern argument.
What do you think Socrates will be cancelled for today?
If Socrates, or let's see, Socrates has a huge Instagram account, and his preaching over Instagram or Facebook, whether it may be, or YouTube, is what he's saying enough to get him cancelled, or worse still, put in prison?
Can I just say off something there? I think Socrates isn't really. I mean, he doesn't really say anything. What he does is he brings out the contradictions of what people are saying. So going back to someone who might be cancelled today, like, for example, someone who is, supporting perhaps something which is misogynistic, no names mentioned, those ideas which are being supported by that current person who gets a lot of traffic on the internet is not coming from a position of interrogation or drawing out contradictions. It is a strong point of view. So lots of people who are shouting on the internet are just coming up with very strong points of view. I don't think Socrates comes up with strong points of view. He comes up with very strong arguments against strong points of view. So I'm finding that the internet is I don't think Socrates would like the internet space, because it doesn't encourage rational, reasonable discussions and is driven by emotion. So I think everyone would be not liking Socrates, because they'd all be saying, I don't like this man. He's of the right, he's of the left, he's woke, he's not woke, because he'd just be bringing all the contradictions that everyone comes up with. Why? Because they're human and they're proud.
There is one bit of the internet Socrates is going to like. He's going to like the Spinoza triad, Because what are we? Yeah. The only thing is, what
We know
we're doing-
nothing. We know nothing.
Yeah. The only thing is,
Yeah.
what we're not doing is what I think what would Socrates would do is we'd be live streaming, and there'd be a dialogue with our audience as well, because he doesn't like writing. And we're in a sense we're I'm going to edit this afterwards, and you know, and you don't edit when you're conversing with, because when you're conversing with Socrates, he's going to put you on the spot, and when you say something and reveal that you don't really know what you're talking about, that's what you've done. And so dialogue for him is live and living and in the moment. But that we're talking unscripted is I think something a bit Socratic. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Well, I don't really agree with you, Dan. I don't think he's not going to be cancelled by anyone in the West, but he might be cancelled by a number of places in the world, because you know, there's still ideas of blasphemy around.
I disagree. I think he could get cancelled in the West. Things, did you see that with Zuckerberg?
Zuckerberg has apparently said that he wished he hadn't allowed himself to be edited. Express certain views.
Yeah, well, suppressing views in regard to that. I mean, again, it's another discussion maybe, but what appears to be an obscure idea at the time, you can't just cancel it or not have it, because you don't know in the future that it could end up being right and everyone else the majority are wrong.
Yeah, well, one. So I'll go with that. That one. Clearly, what we're thinking about here is what you might call the minority beliefs. So, do you cancel mad conspiracy theories because if you do, they might think that to be right? I mean, there have every lots of places in history. The lone voice has turned out to be the truth.
Without challenges to democracy, people would just take it in a dogmatic truth without realising actually the strength of it.
Well, the thing about that is, and absolutely, I mean, I think the dominant way we have of thinking about freedom of expression is to be very tolerant of it. I think broadly that's true. I mean, but we do have a sense in which you can't shout fire in a crowded cinema. The freedom of speech, yes, but you can't shout fire in a crowded cinema, or you can't say those things which harm. In other words, there's that story of Benjamin Franklin who is challenged in the street by someone says, "Well, you believe in freedom of speech and freedom of expression, so on. Therefore, I have the freedom to punch you on the nose, Mr. Franklin." He says, "No, your freedom of expression, it stops where my nose starts." And that idea that there is a point where we all would agree that you can't say that thing because it causes harm, and it's going to. Therefore, you're instantly into a grey area. And if Socrates were with us, he'd say, "Well, what do you mean by harm? You always fully understand what harm is."
Mill does sort of confront that, John, and because he says about the context of an argument, that if somebody's making a point of view in the press, or giving an opinion, sort of in an educational setting, or wherever it may be, is very different from having the same opinion in front of an angry mob to sort of rile people up. So he does say that it's not necessarily just what's said.
That the angry mob is like the agora. It's just whipping up the crowds.
Absolutely, there is a central paradox to our belief in freedom of expression. In that we know that it's very easy to persuade people of things which are daft. Right from the beginning. I mean, Plato, he's not a fan of democracy. He's going to the analogy of the ship of fools. Why would you have a ship captained by the people who know nothing about navigation and shipcraft? So that's what democracy effectively does. It takes the least qualified people and lets them run the place. So there's a moment in I think it's the 1930s, Orson Welles, and he does that adaptation of the War of the Worlds, and it goes out on radio in Newton, and people think they're being invaded because they didn't listen to the beginning of the program. It was going to be an adaptation of War of the Worlds, which sounds like it's a documentary happening now. The Martians are landing, and so people it's been overblown. There's hundreds of people panicked. Maybe they didn't, probably. But there was quite a lot of people believed it. And what it revealed is that we have a very powerful media which platforms any opinion and burnishes it with a sense of authority and authenticity. And unfortunately, we have to be aware of that. Films, newspapers, and now the internet can take an extraordinary view and give it a sense of believability. And we are deeply susceptible to that.
Because if everyone was being Socratic, no mad views would ever, be published on the internet. Everything would be well balanced, well thought through, and everything would be understood in a lot better way. But we don't have that discussion. But we keep talking about freedom and liberty without necessarily having the skills that go with that.
You'd have no truck with this sort of internet guru. Someone like Jordan Peterson would suffer badly in Socrates. Because when Jordan Peterson publishes a book, remember what kind of insightful things there are in it. And the title is something like 5 Ways to Lead Your Life. Then he's clearly setting himself up as someone who really does know some sort of naturally existing in the world truth. And Socrates is going to come along and say, you don't really do.
I don't think he would. I think I would love to see a discussion between those two. Yeah. I mean, what I like about someone like Jordan Peterson is that if you don't agree with him, you've got to form some arguments against what he's saying, because his arguments are well put together, and the areas that he does know about he's very well read in. I mean, his stuff on Jung, I think, is excellent.
There's the Platonic dialogue, the Gorgias, in which Gorgias is this multi-millionaire, in modern terms, rich sophist who teaches young men at colossal fees. He travels all around the classical world. He is a kind of star celebrity sophist, and he will teach young men the thing that gets you on in life, absolutely, and that's rhetoric. He teaches you how to win an argument. And Gorgias is able to say, well, it doesn't care whether right or wrong isn't the point. I'll teach you how you can persuade people. And I bet if you met Gorgias, you'd listen to him for 5 minutes. You say, you have a profound ability to sound convincing.
And I think Socrates would be questioning all that. He'd be going to these, the big names on the internet and really taking them to task. And he would be accused of being a woke master, for trying to get people to think, because these great names on the internet, they rely on ignorance for these things to continue. Conspiracy theories would go nowhere if everyone had a good level of discussion and reason, and despised ignorance.
If we say, look, the internet and all those media outlets are enormously powerful and persuasive, and the evil, as it were, can be there as well as the good, then do we have a right to make judgments about certain things that are found on the internet, found in public life, and say you shouldn't really say that thing, because we feel, like Hume, that you've breached a harm principle. Context of this, the effect it has on the audience, the place you're saying it is harmful, and of course we do have that right. So I think therefore cancelling or editing or deplatforming is necessary at times, and it's going.
That's a great point, John, and that's what Peterson and Tate perhaps less so, because he's more driven by emotion. But definitely Peterson is a fantastic sophist, and everything Socrates wants to do is only to do good. So he's only when he interrogates people, he's saying, do you want to do good? And they start off by saying, yes, of course I do. Then he wants to find out about their position, and he finds out that their position is often so far away from that good that they stated at the earlier point of the argument or discussion, it should be said. So Socrates is only concerned with goodness. He's not concerned about winning arguments. It's just because he's brilliant at bringing out the contradictions of people who say they're good. That's why he had to be put to death.
Who gets to choose? And if you take Mill's first point, that but very often the idea that could be considered obscure at one point becomes the dominant truth. The truth is a mobile army of metaphors, as someone very clever once said. And it's kind of it does shift and change, doesn't it? And I think the problem with suppressing ideas or stopping them. I mean, Mill says in the press, you can say what you want. Remember, I mean, he's quite clear about this as well, that causing an offence is not a harm. You can offend somebody, that's fine. But so unless you're actually directly rallying people and saying, let's go and attack wherever it is, anything else is fair game under Mill's harm principle. So really, I'm not so sure I agree with this cancelling thing, unless you've got a figure on there saying, right, tomorrow we gather arms and we're going to go attack this. I mean, that's clearly you can't support that. But the rest of it becomes a problem because you're deciding who's actually deciding what gets cancelled and what doesn't. That's would bother me, or does bother me.
No, I see. If you draw the circle, and outside of the circle is a direct, urging people to commit violence, you say, well, we can't possibly have that. That's wrong. But inside the circle is everything else, and that woke. And I don't see woke as a particularly bad thing in many ways. I think wokeness, which simply means being aware of different interpretations of history.
We're not talking about wokeness though, John. It's not joining with woke. It's the cancel culture that's associated, that you can't discuss something then, that there's some form of discussion shouldn't be on the table. I think in terms of what Mill's arguing is that no, everything should be on the table, and if you have a better idea, the evidence should prove that it's a better idea, and it should be constantly open to discussion.
I'm going to jump back. What Mill has missed. We have to accept offence. Offence shouldn't be a problem. What did it? Elon Musk said the other day. Free speech is people you don't like saying things you don't like. That's okay, except saying things you don't like, if they're racist, if they are a misogynist, if they are homophobic. You say, well, you got to be allowed to say that. That's just offensive. But we know harm results from those things. Those ideas are pervasive in society. That misogyny is strongly pervasive in countries like the United States, particularly. You find it, and in this country, you find it everywhere. Assumptions and beliefs about women, which are really quite unpleasant and have harm. They don't have harm, but there are harm in an unconscious bias here. There are harm in a way you treat people there, and so language and how you express yourself, even when it's not an urge to go and murder women, obviously won't allow that. But language and how you express yourself, you do have to be aware of its effect. Maybe Socrates is guilty of this a bit, but he claims to know nothing, so not so much. But as soon as you enter into a dialogue which says on the one hand or on the other hand, kind of liberal discussion. So some people say this, but there's an alternative view. When you platform views which are dangerous, erroneous, or offensive, okay, not dangerous. And if you platform things that could indirectly lead to offence, which could lead to harm in people's then you give them an authenticity. It's the trouble with, in a sense, the idea that we have to listen to all voices with equal value because we give them equal value. Yeah. And I don't think someone arguing for that climate change isn't caused by humans right now is of equal value to someone of the vast majority of
The
scientists.
people who are
They could be
wrong.
wrong. They could, of course, I suppose, be wrong, because that's always a possibility that you could.
John Mill, judging by, the harm principle, I mean, Mill wouldn't agree with that. He would say that you could have those opinions, you could say those things, and in a context of a press, which I just put press now as social media, there has to be a space where people can put together offensive, if they want to. Again, with every right there comes a responsibility as well, which is often missing nowadays. But you have to be able to say something, and it has to be argued against. So if we just take misogyny as an example, that people, I think they've just passed a law now, haven't they, against being able to say certain things. But what has to happen is you have to have people that then argue against and show the error of the idea. I mean, that's the idea of a liberal society, isn't it? So you can't suppress points of view, even if they are offensive to you. You have to argue and show with the argument that they're in the wrong, and hopefully, with reasoned people listening, that the strongest idea, the best idea, that comes true. And I don't want to see views online that I find offensive. It's not pleasant to see or read. I'm not supporting any. Very problematic when you start suppressing people's views. And I think the trouble is with offence now being what it is that I don't know where you stop.
And this brings to an end another episode of the Spinoza Triad, where Dr. Richard Miller, Dan Rowland and myself, John Gibbs, explore ideas which interest us. This week, we looked at Socrates and the idea of free speech, what can be said, what might cause offence and what might not. Next, we shall explore freedom from a different angle. Thank you for listening.